right, thank you for coming. My name is Yayoi Lagerqvist, and I work with an organization called Swedwatch. We are running a side event titled Safeguarding the Right to a Healthy Environment, Roles of Defenders in Business Actors. We have 4 speakers. One speaker, David Boyd, is in another meeting at the moment. He will be coming to join this session shortly. This event is co-organized by 11 organizations. I won't read the list of names. All of the organizations are here, and I believe the representatives of these organizations are here with us. And just briefly, before we start, introduction, in terms of the session, the main focus is on the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. This was the new right that was recognized by the United Nations Human Rights Council last year. We will be discussing about this right from various perspectives, namely from defenders, environmental and human rights defenders' perspectives, as well as from business perspectives. Now, let me quickly introduce you to the 4 distinguished speakers with many different hats. First, Jennifer Rosario-Malonzo, Executive Director of Ebon International. And then Charlotta Szczepanowski, you can correct me of the pronunciation. She's the Sustainability and Quality Director at Co-op Sweden. And then to the left of Charlotta is Radiatu. She's the head of the administration of Green Advocates International from Liberia. Okay. And then we also have key note takers for this side events. Honorable General Secretary of Swedish Society for Nature Conservation, Karin Lexin. Can you raise your hand, Karin? She will be listening into our conversation and sharing her take-home messages that will be shared towards the end. And the other honorable key note-taker is Ulrika Sandberg from Amnesty International. Ulrika, where are you? Can you raise your hand there? Yeah. It's right there. Okay. And then, of course, myself, the moderator, Yayoi Lagerqvist with Swedwatch. So, we're moving into a dialogue 1.
¿Cómo hacen cuando la gente del pueblo lucha en defensa de sus derechos tomando su carretera? Le tiran bombas lacrimógenas.
Hable con el señor alcalde. Conmigo lo tiene. Yo ya dije que tenemos para y yo no puedo pagarlo.
Mire, Sergio Rodríguez tiene esta maquinaria aquí con Raúl Pineda. Es de la empresa.
Yo a rato le estoy diciendo que la quite.
Compañeros y compañeras, sigamos. Vamos, el pueblo unido.
Hay conmoción y protestas en Honduras tras el asesinato de Berta Cáceres, de 45 años. Ella era una reconocida activista a favor del medio ambiente.
En el año 2009, Honduras sufrió un golpe catalogado como un golpe cívico-militar y nosotras entendimos rápidamente que no se trataba de un golpe de Estado para quitar a un presidente. Uno de los componentes centrales del golpe de Estado fue, digamos, la consolidación de un modelo económico que se ha sustentado sobre el extractivismo y sobre la privatización de los bienes comunes y de la naturaleza. Una de esas concesiones otorgadas en el territorio del pueblo lenca era el proyecto hidroeléctrico Aguasarca. Cuando yo supe la noticia del asesinato de Berta Cáceres, que era mi mamá, pues yo no dudé que ella había sido asesinada por su lucha y por los intereses de esta empresa, así que se empezó a investigar quiénes eran los financiadores del proyecto, porque no se conocían.
La muerte de Berta Cáceres, desgraciadamente, es la crónica de una muerte anunciada. Ella había denunciado hasta en 33 ocasiones las amenazas que estaba recibiendo por la razón de defender su tierra, pero mucho mejor que yo lo va a contar Berta.
Es para hacer un llamado de atención a los financiadores de estos proyectos que han violentado principios, valores y también vidas humanas, como lo son el caso del Banco de Desarrollo Holandés, el FMO, la participación del Banco Finlandés, el Finfond, y también de empresas como Siemens y Bohydro. Entonces, bueno, son las intenciones de esta visita a la Unión Europea y, bueno, decirles que la lucha por la justicia no cesará, porque el amor es el motor más grande y el compromiso que ahora tenemos con la verdad pues no va a ser detenido ni por el cansancio ni por todas las adversidades.
Se trata de la vida, se trata de los ríos, se trata de luchar por las próximas generaciones, no ser un pueblo burdo, no ser un pueblo sumiso. Hay que ser un pueblo rebelde ante la injusticia, sin miedo, sin temor.
Una se pregunta, ¿de dónde tanta fuerza? ¿De dónde tantas Bertas?
I will bring in here Jennifer and Radiatu to briefly reflect on the scenes that we saw. Introduce yourselves briefly to the audience and reflect on film.
Okay.
That would be great.
Thanks so much, Yayoy. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jennifer del Rosario-Malonzo. I work with Ibon International. It's a Southern international NGO. We work on capacity development for the Global South. We work basically for people's movements and social movements, and we have partnerships with them and cooperate with them on many struggles and campaigns as well as advocacy. So for my reflection on the video shown of Berta Cáceres, it really looks very familiar. It really shows that what we have been experiencing in the Philippines are also seen elsewhere. No? All the human rights violations, the attacks against environmental defenders that happen in our country is similarly experienced by other peoples. And so this also shows the need for international solidarity among all of us. What struck me most is also the reason underneath, underlying these attacks against environmental defenders and human rights defenders, which are mostly about economic and profit interests. So these are the motivation for the violence against defenders. And in our case, the Philippines has also been ranked among the worst country for human rights and environmental defenders. For example, within the period of this last 5 years, 2016 to 2021, it has been recorded that about 195 land and environmental defenders have been murdered because of their fight, because of their campaigns against aggression on their territories and their lands, and because they are fighting for their lives, their livelihoods, and their freedoms. So.
Thank you, Jennifer. Radiatu, can you quickly share us your reflections of this film clip?
Okay, thank you so much, Yayo. Thank you to the organizers of this section. When I take a look at the video, what comes to my mind is some of the things that Liberians are experiencing because of the quote-unquote investments that we have in our country that claim to reduce poverty and bring a new trend of life to communities. So This is something that has happened like over 10 years now in our country. We have had protests all over the communities where we see the presence of business corporations. And when those protests are ongoing, we rather see that our governments have the police, the militaries are the ones that move in to subdue these communities that have decided to stand up for their rights. They are beaten, they are tortured, they are being criminalized. Majority of them are put in jail, and they create a space where they provide like big funds that NGOs are supposed to go and get bonds for these communities. And in the video, I see a strong environmental and human rights activist that stood up for her community because she felt that this is the livelihood she has, the livelihood that her communities have, and like they have no alternative, and there was a need to stand up. We had a situation of a protest in our country in the southeastern part of Liberia, where women stood up like the lady in the video, and there was this particular lady that was beaten and stripped naked. I mean, stripped naked in her community, which was something that was so bad, because like that lady felt so embarrassed, a very older lady that saw her son being beaten because they decided to protest, and she decided to go and grab her son, and in turn the police grabbed her and beat her and stripped her naked and sent her to jail. We've also seen that we have pregnant women. A pregnant lady that knew nothing about the protest just came from the bathroom to go to her house. She was being grabbed, she was beaten, she was put in jail. That pregnant lady gave birth to her baby in the jail. So these are not strange for our country, because these are things we witness on a daily basis over the past 10 years, with the notion that our governments have signed onto these investments to come and improve the lives of our people. But for us, we don't see it as improvement at all. Yeah.
And here, you both, Jennifer and Radiatu, you both brought us a few photos to share from your respective regions. Of course, Berta's case was in Latin America, but similar situation as you described, we observe on day-to-day basis. So perhaps first, Jennifer, if you can describe to the audience, what are we seeing here today? It says Jalua Mega Dam Project.
Yes.
What does this mean?
So this is the Halaur Mega Dam Project. It's a hydropower project. It was actually postponed for over 3 decades because of opposition from the communities around the dam area. However, during the current Duterte regime, in 2018, in partnership with the Korean government, the project has been resumed. So this project shows us that the many impacts that can be seen because of developments like this mega dam project. Assessments of this project showed that this can impact and alter ecosystems in the area. So this is located in central Philippines in Panay Islands, which is among the most biodiverse islands in the Philippines. And because of this project, the impact on the flora and fauna in the area is really huge. So there is a danger of reducing biodiversity in the area, as well as possibly causing the extinction of a number of endangered species. Aside from that, of course, another impact is that it would be reducing the water availability as well as quality for the communities living in the area of the mega dam.
So this is part of the impact that you're talking about. Can you talk us through the picture?
On people, So that was on the impact on the environment, but on people. The extractive industries and mega projects, mega infrastructure projects like this hydropower plant, hydropower dam, have been identified as the main drivers of attacks versus human rights defenders and environmental defenders. These attacks range from harassment, red tagging, which means you are tagged as a communist, and therefore you are a terrorist automatically, and you are targeted by the Philippine security forces. The communities also experience militarization, and as well as having charges filed against community leaders, against those who are outspoken about the impacts of these projects on them. So aside from this, it can also be enforced disappearance, meaning you will just be erased from the face of the earth, just because you are standing for the rights of your family, your community, your land. And then the worst, of course, would be the extrajudicial killings. It can be an assassination or a wholesale massacre. For example, this protest is in reaction to what happened to community leaders in the Halaur Dam area. 9 indigenous peoples from the Tumanduk communities were killed by the police and military in an operation, in a raid against the communities there, done in December 30, 2020. So aside from those 9 killed, massacred, a number were also arrested, illegally detained, and many families were displaced from their homes. So, and all of this happened because the communities were opposing the Halaur Dam construction. So that is the very unfortunate and bloody impact of these infrastructure and extractive projects. But what is hopeful for us is also, as these pictures show, that people are fighting back, are resisting, are continuing the work that needs to be done to defend our communities as well as our environment.
Thank you, Jennifer. Radiatu, you also brought us a photo. Can you perhaps share us your insight from your experiences in Liberia?
Thank you so much. This is just one photo from our work. My response to the question is based on the past 15 years, the work we've done with communities in Liberia. So this picture is from one of our projects in Liberia. This is the Firestone Brickstone Company rubber plantation. So the water you see coming from the pipe there and being emptied into a body of water, that is the waste from the Firestone rubber plant. And that river you see there is a very big, major river that many of the communities that are affected by Firestone are living along this river. And this is the river that many of those communities have their livelihood with. This is the river that they depend on, though they have land, but for them, they depend on this river for everything as it relates to their livelihood. So what we've seen with many of these kinds of things in our country is that we see that there is loss of land. Communities lost their land when these kind of investments come. We see that forest lands are also taken away, because when they grab the land, they don't negotiate, they move in and just grab, absolutely everything. So there is loss of farmland, there is loss of forest land, there is loss of completely access to any land. Then there is also the issue of forced eviction. that communities experience. They experience economic displacement. They experience destruction of their towns and villages and destruction of natural resources as a whole. And they also experience like destruction of food crops and trees, because many of these communities have these things in their area. The other thing is the one in the picture, which is the pollution of water sources, contamination of drinking water, the rivers, the creeks. Some of them are like diverted to be able to help the company's crops grow, rather than it's being reserved for the communities. We also see that the industrial waste, as seen here, is the one that is not taken care of properly, and it's rather like being deposited to a place where communities' livelihood are affected in a way. And the other thing I see is that there's also this issue about religious, spiritual, and cultural sites, ancestral grave sites. The desecration of these areas are kind of serious for the kind of investment that have gone to our countries. And like where there is this thing about legitimate grievances being expressed by these communities, these environmental harms, communities have been subjected to harassments, intimidations, coupled with criminal charges, ranging from criminal trespasses, economic sabotage, disorderly conduct, and imprisonment of defenders that decide to defend their customary land rights. So, like, these are just few of the many things we see. And like, we've seen in some of the areas where the companies, we understand that these communities are about to stand up, so they will grab like maybe about 30 of the community members, take them to the police, and then put them in jail. And their aim is to be able to reduce the kind of energy these communities have to stand up for their rights. If business is good, communities wouldn't stand up. If a business is good for the livelihood of communities, there will be no protest. There will be no need for someone to stand up for a good business, a business that has come to change the lives of community and bring them alternative source of livelihood. There will be no protest. So these are the things that we have witnessed in our country, and it's so disturbing. It has reduced the work of some of those people, some of the defenders that have all of the energy, because, like, for example, majority of them have been affected by tear gas. Some of them are blind. Some of them gone crippled. Some of them cannot no more stand up. Like, and when the other young ones are looking at those kind of things, they are not encouraged to get up to stand up. But I can tell you that we have not given up. We still have the courage. We still have the strength to encourage these communities people. One thing we always leave with them is that you are not alone. This is a global crisis that is ongoing. There are so many other countries. And then we try to bring back some of those videos, like the one we saw. Here's a lady. She stood up. Yes, it's true she was being killed, but her work remains forever. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Radiatu. And as you can see and hear, that these are environmental harm that's been long-standing, despite that we have this Stockholm Declaration in 1972, to which we are celebrating the 50 years. So there are lots of challenges ahead. Now, I forgot to ask who's in the audience. As you entered the room, you were probably given a sticker. So for those of you who are representing member states or government, can you just quickly raise the hand? Seems like you guys are a minority, yeah? Not surprising. For those of you representing businesses, great, you're another minority, but you're here at least. Those of you representing CSO, NGOs, great, okay. And others, possibly media, academics, others? Great, so we have sort of a diversity of audience. Excellent, so we'll move on to the second dialogue now that David is here.
Sorry for being late.
That's all right. And this next section, next part of the dialogue, we would like to sort of understand how do we actually interpret this right to a healthy environment from expert perspectives. So here we have David Boyd.
Well, thanks very much. Oh, geez, I got to thank.
Before you start.
That's a funny picture.
Yes.
The right to a healthy environment was recognized for the first time at the global level last October by the UN Human Rights Council, which is really a historic moment in the evolution of human rights. It had its roots really back in the Stockholm Declaration of 1972, and of course there's more than 155 countries around the world that already recognize this right, like the Philippines in its constitution, other countries through legislation, others through regional human rights treaties. And what does it really mean, the right to a healthy environment? It means that everyone on this planet has the right to breathe clean air, the right to safe and sufficient water, the right to healthy and sustainably produced food, the right to healthy ecosystems and biodiversity, the right to non-toxic environments where people can live, work, study, and play, and the right to a safe climate. And those are the substantive elements of the right to a healthy environment. And it also comes with a toolbox for people to use, which include the right of access to environmental information, the right to participate in environmental decision-making, and the right of access to justice with effective remedies if their right is being threatened or violated. And because human rights law has a long history, it also comes with some really key principles to guide its implementation. Principles such as non-regression, which means that governments have to move forwards, they can't move backwards. Non-discrimination, which is really critical in a world where we know that the climate crisis, the biodiversity collapse, and pervasive pollution have a disproportionate impact on poor people, vulnerable and marginalized communities. And also the key principle of prevention. So I'm really hopeful that this UN resolution will actually serve as a catalyst for a cascade of positive changes, including changes to constitutions, changes to legislation, changes to policies and programs, and most importantly, changes on the ground. And I think one of the really important things in the context of this conversation is that the recognition of everyone's right to a healthy environment really legitimizes and validates the incredible work that is being done by environment and human rights defenders around the world. It should really be something, I mean, it's kind of a lengthy term, environment and human rights defenders. I prefer just planetary heroes, because really that's what these people are. They're putting themselves at risk to protect the land, the water, the biodiversity that all of us fundamentally depend upon. And so, again, my hope is that we can use this right as a way to empower environment and human rights defenders and protect environment and human rights defenders. And the last thing I'll say just quickly is that for a long time, governments have considered these things like clean air and clean water, healthy nature, to be things like luxuries, kind of options that they could balance with other things. Talking about these issues in human rights terms changes those options into obligations. And we all have a job to do in holding governments accountable to fulfilling those obligations.
Thanks, David. If I may ask, what is the one thing that stuck with you listening to Jennifer and Radiatu's respective stories from the ground?
Yeah, I have to admit, one of the hardest things about being the UN Special Rapporteur is hearing these stories, which are so heartbreaking. And so really, when I listen to your stories, it just kind of galvanizes my desire to work harder to protect and support and empower environment and human rights defenders.
Thank you.
Thank you. And can you also describe what are we seeing here in the photo?
Well, I have friends who worked for literally 30 years to secure United Nations resolution on the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. So this is just moments after it happened in the Human Rights Room in Geneva at the Human Rights Council. And, it wouldn't have happened without the incredible support of over 1,300 civil society organizations, indigenous peoples organizations, even a coalition of responsible businesses, believe it or not, that joined this effort and put pressure on the nations to vote in favor of this resolution.
Okay, thank you. What needs to happen next?
What needs to happen next is, well, there's a few things. So we have like a United Nations Declaration on the rights of human rights defenders. We have UN guiding principles on business and human rights. And I would say that those guiding principles were developed by a lot of well-intentioned people, but we've had them in place for a decade. And I think any honest assessment would look at them and say, they're simply not good enough. We need laws, regulations, and legally binding instruments that hold businesses accountable. Businesses are responsible for the great majority of environment-related human rights violations. And so I think it's really important to focus some of our efforts on initiatives to create these laws that are called human rights and environmental due diligence laws. They have been passed by several countries in Europe, led by France. There's a European Union proposal for a directive on human rights and environmental due diligence. And there's also a draft UN treaty on human rights and environmental due diligence. And so I think that's the fundamental next step, is to move from voluntary tools which don't work to legally binding standards which are much more likely to protect the people that we care about.
Thank you, David. And this is a nice segue into bringing business actors. So we have here Charlotta, representing Co-op.
Yep.
She has a wide expertise in sustainability issues, not only in the food and retail sector, but more broadly. So perhaps we may start with a brief introduction of what you do with Co-op and beyond.
Yes, I'm Director of Sustainability and Quality within the Swedish Coop, and that's, of course, a retail organization for food. But Coop is also a member of We Effect, and I'm also in the board of the agroforestry. So I'm also working a lot with these kinds of issues. And what I want to say is that we are very much behind all this discussion that you're talking about, that we need regulation, because the voluntary things that we're doing, we really try, but it's quite hard to do it. And I must address that we're quite far from where we're aiming. We see that we historically has been relied upon some labels, a lot on labels, and what we see now in Sweden is that the labels are decreasing. Our customer doesn't buy labels such as fair trade and eco labels as much as they did previously, which is alarming. And another thing that I want to lift is that the law doesn't even say that we need to know where the ingredients of our products are being produced. We just need to know where the production is. And we know that it's where the ingredients are produced. That's where the problems occur. So we're very far from, protecting the environment when we don't even know where the production is. And that is something that we wanted to do something about within the Swedish Coop. So therefore, we started to work with our sustainability declarations that you can see on the picture. And what we do is that we collect information on ingredients of our products from all our suppliers. At present, we have 13,000 products out of 17,000 products in our store that are declared. So we take all this information on country or region for the ingredients and the production. And then we take information about labels and certification throughout the whole supply chain. And then we transform that to this kind of sustainability footprint. And here you can see one is, for example, local population, and that's basically what we're talking about today. And this axis is we are putting number on that based on BSCI rules of law. And then, of course, if our suppliers say that they have special programs, then we're adjusting the parameter. Or if you have, for example, fair trade label, then we're adjusting the parameter, or a KRAV label, for example. So this is a way of getting we have so many products, and getting information and be able to make the right decision on all these products. And we take, what we do is that when we're doing audits, then we look at this. Where are the risks for water problems, or for that is not compliant with laws and regulation, or the local population, or working conditions, and so on. And then we go there and do our audits based on that. We have it in our sourcing. We use this when we source our products, so we can see which products are having the most problems, and then we can get rid of them or work with our suppliers on those particular areas. And we also communicate all this information towards our customers, because we need our customer to be aware and understand sustainability and make the right choices in the store. And maybe they need to pay some extra, because someone is paying when they are not paying. So we need to get this them to understand this. So this is what we do right now in order to get a grip on all these products. And I'm really, when you speak, it really touches me. And I've heard these stories from our audits, where my members in my group are going to Vietnam or whatever and find these kind of conditions for people of Peru. We heard about the asparagus the other year and so on. So there are lots of problems, but we need to work very strategic in order to make these things better.
Thank you, Charlotta. And from your extensive experiences working in the sustainability field in the corporate sector, are you observing any changes in the late few years in terms of how corporate actors perform environmental and human rights due diligence?
Yes, I think I see that we have always cooperated, but I think that one initiative, for example, the ETI, Ethical Trade Initiative for Sweden, started, where we are cooperating also with the unions and the public sector and the businesses and the NGOs. So we try to work together, which make us more understanding the situation better. And there they, for example, are focusing now very much on crops, on crops that are in risk crops, for example, soybean and palm oil and cocoa. So they're really looking into the full supply chain and try to see how the impact are and how we can address that on these risk crops. So that's a good initiative. But I think it's so important that we work together. We really need to work together. NGOs, businesses, everybody needs to work together, because this is so hard. We need rules and regulations, and we really need to take each other by the arm and really move forward together.
Thank you, Charlotta. All right, so we are now going to move into Q&A session. And I believe there are questions that were pre-appointed. And perhaps I might give the floor to Kerstin, perhaps, first. If you can introduce yourself briefly, that would be great. And then perhaps specify who you're actually asking the questions to. That would be fantastic.
Yes, thank you. My name is Kerstin Andersson. I'm from Amnesty Sápmi in Sweden. I would like to talk about the colonization of Sápmi. It has going on for over 200 years. We had the hydropower, as you talked about in Philippines. We have the forestry and the mining industry. The ground for the reindeer herding is shrinking. And now, with the fight against climate changes, we got the green colonization with wind power in Sápmi. In my herding district, Gällivare, a company owned by a Dutch pension foundation recently got permission to build an industrial plant with wind power in an area where my ancestors, for hundreds and hundreds of years, have had their reindeers. The Sami was not even consulted when the state-owned enterprise, Sveaskog, wrote the agreement to let the Sami land go. It's not a healthy environment, not for humans and not for the reindeers. We can't even trust the state-owned companies in Sweden. So I have a question to you, David. I would like to hear your opinion. What kind of instruments are needed in the global community to convince or force a country like Sweden to protect the Sam culture and the reindeer herding?
Okay, thank you. I'll take two more questions. One, I believe Louise, General Secretary of Africa Grupperna, wanted to raise a question.
Yes, thank you so much. I wanted to actually share a greeting also for a partner organization in Mozambique, Justicia Ambiental. And they wanted to ask more or less the same question, and it will be directed to David as well, so you can incorporate that in your answer. It has to do with the due diligence and the next step and how to move forward when it comes to the binding treaty. Because Ilham, she sent a message here to me. I will read it. A conversation like this focusing on the symptoms and the human rights defenders at stake is not the actual cause. We need to talk about human rights defenders we can't talk about human rights defenders without recognizing the reason we even have human rights defenders is because of the fossil fuel industry. By speaking out and how to make things better for human rights defenders is not putting we shouldn't just put a small plaster on a growing wound. We should submit to the industry and we should fight the root cause, not only the problem. So, yeah, she wants us to level up when it comes to the binding treaty and how these steps can be taken forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Louise. And the third question, I believe, is coming from WeEffect's Anna. If you can briefly introduce yourself and then perhaps direct the question to other distinguished panelists, that would be fantastic.
Will do so. Thank you very much. My name is Anna, and I'm the Secretary General of WeEffect. And when you did the initial roll count, and we noticed that, were there 2 representatives of the private sector in here? My question is, actually, sorry, but to all of you, how can we ensure that next time such a seminar is held, that it's the majority? How can we be more relevant? Charlotta, what can we do to make life better for you so that you can move faster within COOP? What can we do as civil society just to push the buck, to put it? That would be my question.
Thank you very much. So perhaps, David, you've got 2 questions. So I'll give you the microphone first, and then Carlotta, and then the last words to Jennifer and Radiatu.
Thank you very much. And 3 years ago, I visited Sápmi territory as part of my country mission to Norway and was really struck by the extent of industrial development, as you mentioned, hydropower, wind turbines, mining activities. And I think it's important to recognize that indigenous peoples themselves fought for many decades to achieve the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. But that's not enough. We need to take that UN declaration and transform it into law at the national level. Indigenous rights should prevent those types of activities from proceeding unless governments and businesses have the full, free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous people. So it really came as a shock to me, to be honest, recently when the Gallup mine received approval here in Sweden. My colleague, the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and myself wrote a letter to the government of Sweden expressing our concerns. We got, to be honest, a very poor response back from the government. So I think the critical step is twofold. One is to, as I said, put those indigenous rights into national legislations and ideally national constitutions, as we've done in Canada, which really does make a difference because constitutions are the highest and strongest form of law in any country, and they also reflect the country's deepest and most cherished values. So I think that would be something that would be important to see happen here. And I also will note that the Sami people won a very big lawsuit in Norway about the construction of a major wind project without their consent. So that's an encouraging sign that at least courts are willing to stand up for the rights of Sami people. The question about dealing with the root causes, I completely agree that we live in a global economy that is fundamentally based on the exploitation of people and the exploitation of this planet. And so we need to take transformative steps to change that situation. Human rights and environmental due diligence legislation is just one piece of that. I think that we all need to gather our forces to work on shifting from the fossil fuel economy to the renewable energy economy as quickly as possible. And I think that means that there should be no expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure in any wealthy northern state. We should phase out fossil fuels. We should, as the Secretary General said yesterday, coal should be dismantled in every wealthy nation by 2030. Some nations, part of the Powering Past Coal Alliance, have made that commitment, so that's encouraging, but we need to do more, we need to do it faster. We need to transform today's linear economy where we treat nature as nothing more than a warehouse of resources for humans, and then make stuff, waste it, and put it back into the environment as pollution and waste. We need to transform that into a circular economy, detoxifying the global economy. These are major, major challenges, major shifts that are required. But I believe that just as freedom and equality were catalysts for the transformation of a colonial economy based on slavery, we can use human rights today as catalysts for the transformation of this exploitative global economy in which we live.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
And Charlotta?
Yes, I thought about the thing that you mentioned, Anna, that it's only NGOs in here, almost, and I thought just practical, maybe write something else when in the program and try to include business better. Maybe that would make business come here. I'm not sure, but I think that that could be something to think about next time. And then I thought what we need to do and what we need in our business from NGOs. I think this is really a very hard question to answer, but I think that we have the structure with our sustainability declarations. Maybe if you can help us to make sure that the structure is getting better, because we have this rules that we are based this on, and maybe you can help us to get that better so we get even more right when we do our audits, for example. I'm thinking about Sapmi. I wrote here, we don't have that in our sustainability declarations. How do we adjust the parameters according to the things that you said? So maybe that can be that you can help us to make our structure better. Do you understand? Or? Yeah, to make our structure better so that we can make better decisions. That could be one thing. And then, of course, you can help us to, when we do our audits, for example, to find the right people to talk to outside the industry where we are doing our audits. Maybe we're talking to human rights people around, but maybe we should talk to farmers, corporations, for example. Maybe they are the one that have the knowledge, so we have better control when we do our audits. That's another thing that I can think of. And then, of course, understand each other better. The normal. We need to sit down, discuss, have more. We need to work more together, of course.
More conversations.
More conversations, but that we don't have time for, but very effective conversations.
Yeah, perhaps in the corridors.
Yeah.
Jennifer?
All right, thanks. I totally agree with David about the need for more work on having binding agreements and instruments. But I would also emphasize accountability. Let's look at all the actors who are responsible. These are powerful actors, states themselves, our own government in the Philippines, who have policies and that are inimical to our own people, and who are using its security forces against its own people. So you have that. And then we have donor countries, international financial institutions who support projects and programs that are actually proven to be detrimental to people and the environment. Who else? Let me just say, of course, not all business or corporations, but many of them, the huge ones, are really have practices that are rooted in exploiting, in extracting, from our people and country. So, how do we combat, such powerful forces, while instruments and talking with each other, dialogues, are, of course, very important. I would still really put my trust on people's movements and their own actions, because people will be the ones who will change this world. So yeah, sorry. Sorry for that emotional.
Thank you, Jennifer. And Radiatu?
Yeah, so what can we do to mount more pressure, right? What I'm thinking on is that, for example, across West Africa, we've seen this Stockholm-based company that cut across West Africa. So for me, I think one of the things we can do as civil society organizations is to join hands and collectively work. Those of us that are affected by these companies work together and come up with a strong, formidable force to be able to reach out to them. Jennifer said it, these are multi-billion-dollar companies. We are just small organizations, but we are the people and we have the power. If we decide to get up and stand up as countries that are affected, we could mount pressure on this. I mean, like, cutting across, like, it's in Sierra Leone today, it's in Liberia the same day, it's in Africa Coast, and all over. That is a power that could, like, force these private sector to try to change some of these violations they are facing. But the other thing is that we can also use our laws, national and international laws, to be able to file complaints. So that's some of the work Green Advocates is doing. So we are using the ECOWAS court to file a complaint on behalf of a community that is affected by one of the Stockholm companies. But we are also going to test our national law. So we're going to be doing it simultaneously. So like whichever one that comes out is what, because like honestly, we don't really trust our governments. We don't trust the judiciary system because they are all captured. So we want to take it to the international level so that we are able to get the kind of justice communities need. That's one of the things NGOs can do. But also, what we need, again, is support from our governments that sign onto these international instruments. When you sign onto something, you agree to it. So it is their duty to support NGOs so that when we take on these issues, when we stand up, they are behind us, and we feel that could be of help. Thank you.
Thank you, Radiatu. So please, if you want.
Thank you, Jennifer. The story you talk about, heartbreaking. I'm from IKEA, so I work at IKEA Supply Chain as Head of Sustainability. I just want to say I'm very happy that I'm here in this room with my one colleague, and the other one, he had to go. And I hope that we could be more people here from the business, because polarization between business, NGOs, companies, UNs, whomever, is not helping the cause. Because we need to work together. First and foremost, we are all human beings. I'm Christina, then I happen to work somewhere, and I try to do good. How do we apply the values, humanistic values, in everything that we do? And I think at IKEA, we have our vision is to create a better everyday life for the many people. And that really includes everyone. We cannot do good business if we don't do good for people, and what you talked about, the nexus. It's about climate, it's about nature, it's about people. All have to flourish and have the rights on their side to actually do something together. So I think that we as a business have a very big and important role to play to show that responsible business is the way forward and where we have to work together. Of course, we have areas where we can do better, where we can be even more, have the ear to the ground and work together with the different groups in society, communities, local communities, indigenous people who knows about raw materials, how to extract in a responsible way, what you can use or not. And there's more we can do together. So we always want to have this multi-stakeholder approach where we work together. So please see people as we work together. And I think we are human beings on this one planet. Let's make it a good one. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. But before we end, can we ask our key note takers to sum up quickly? Yeah, Karin? I think there's a floating mic.
I think it's easier, actually, and I think Ulrika should also come forward. So how do you summarize so many very important issues? And I was wondering, maybe looking at Kerstin, I wanted to say at first, as a Swede and representing a big organization, I really would like to begin with recognizing and also saying that I'm ashamed of the history of colonization of our country and of Sápmi and the still ongoing violation on your rights. This is important for me to say, and this is our responsibility here in Sweden, and that is also a reason why we have engaged in the Gallup case as organization. But then, trying to address everything that has been said so far, I mean, we know that according to the UN Rights Council, the triple planetary threats is the single greatest human rights challenge of our time. And I think it's really interesting what you say, David, that the human rights can be a catalyst to address those issues. And we see that the environmental defenders, or the planetary saviors, as I really liked as a phrase, really placed at the intersection of weak institutions, violation of human rights, economic greed, the rich people wants to get even richer, and our unsustainable consumption, where each one of us responsible for what is happening. And I really would like to emphasize that we need targets on phasing out of fossil fuels as one of the instruments for achieving a change. The adoption of the resolution on the right to a healthy planet is, of course, an important step forward in the right direction. But as you were also pointing out, there is now a need for member states to move from recognition on the paper to implementing policy and instruments that can truly protect people and planet. And as you were also saying, to move from voluntary agreements that we have seen are not enough for really securing planet or the people, and to move towards legally binding instruments. And what strikes me again and again from witnesses of you and others is that we really need to see the change on the ground. It's good to have principles on papers, but we need to move to a real change on the ground. And we need legally binding instruments for businesses, but we also need meaningful participation for those who are affected by the violations. And they need to be safely included in the decision-making process. So we need to move from paper to implementation. Thank you.
Very hard to take after this. I think most has been said. What I would like to emphasize is that I'm really pleased that today we have actually talked about the nexus between human rights and the environment. I come from Amnesty. We work on human rights, but we're also working on climate justice, so we're merging the two more and more. And secondly, I don't know exactly how to say, but you have given us such powerful and you're doing extremely brave and also dangerous work as human rights and environmental defenders. Yeah, I just wanted to give you my appreciation for that. But also I wanted to say that what we've heard today, I think, highlights that there is a big gap between businesses. Some are acting responsibly or trying to do their best, and there are other companies that are not acting in a responsible way. Amnesty, as well as most of the organizations here today, we're working for or lobbying for a very strong EU directive on human rights and environmental due diligence. And I think, yeah, Professor Boyd, you mentioned that as well, the need for legislation, the need for work at the UN level. We see it coming at the EU level. Unfortunately, the draft that we've seen is a bit weak. So the civil society organizations are working to make that stronger. And there are certain elements that we are pressing for. For example, we want the forthcoming directive to include all companies. We want it to, when finalized, enable effective remediation. And another aspect which has been touched upon here as well, also by our Sami colleagues here, is, of course, the issue of consultation. What we want to see is that consultation should be effective and that the international law principle, free, prior informed consent, should be part of this text when it's adopted. And this is in order for environmental and human rights defenders to be seen as allies and not as enemies. We're also seeing more and more case law developing, which I think is worthwhile mentioning. We see cases against Shell, RWE, etc., cases that concern both human rights and environmental issues, where companies have been negatively affecting those. So we do see some lights a light in the tunnel. We do see the EU directive coming. We think that's very positive. But as I said before, we need to work to make that really, really strong in order for, us all to be having a planet and basically a healthy planet for all. Thank you.
So in the interest of time, just a quick one-word mood of the day, starting from Charlotta and then Jennifer.
Well, I'm just very touched and moved about your presentations and what you presented here today. And I think that I will go home and reflect a bit more on how we have our structure and see if we can find solutions that make it even better and push our company towards even more human rights discussions.
And David?
My word is honored, which it's just an honor to be on a panel with people of such courage and bravery. And I think I'd also just like to point out how incredible it is, the role of women and girls as environmental human rights defenders.
Radiatu, one word.
I just want to say thanks to the audience for listening to our story from way in West Africa. And my hope is that the world will hear about our stories and like those that are responsible, those that are the actors of the kind of environmental harm that our communities in our country are facing will be told about these things and that justice will be served for those communities. Yeah.
All right, my one word is solidarity. We need your solidarity. The Philippines needs your solidarity. You would have known that we have just a recent election, and we feel that what has been happening in the last 6 years would perhaps continue or worsen under the incoming administration of Marcos Jr. and Duterte. So these families' bloody regimes are set to, again, come into power by June 30. So please keep your eyes on the Philippines, on our situation, and help us also to expose any violence that would be expectedly happening in the next months or years. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. All right, so our session is over. And we've got the recordings. We will share it at a later date. We will definitely let you know. Thanks for coming.